Welcome back. In this video, we will be focusing on an element of human development which is known as cognitive development. Cognitive development can be defined as the process by which infants get to know about themselves and the world around them. And when we talk about cognition and cognitive activities, we're referring to mental activities associated with things such as thinking, knowing, problem solving, remembering, language, communication. Those are cognitive type of functions, and so we'll be focusing on the development of these kinds of abilities. One of the pioneers in the study of human cognition is Jean Piaget. As you can see here, Piaget was born in the late 1800s and died in 1980. He was a Swiss psychologist. He was employed at one point by the Delaney Institute in the 1920s, where his job was to develop French versions of questions on English intelligence tests. And you'll be learning about Alfred Binet and intelligence testing in a later unit in this course. Piaget became intrigued with the reasons that children gave for the wrong answers that they came up with on these intelligence tests. And Piaget believed that these wrong or incorrect answers really weren't wrong, but they just revealed important differences between how children and adults see the world. And if you're interested in learning more, I've provided a web link here. You can find other good sources of information on Piaget if you want to learn more about him and his background. Now, according to the theory developed by Piaget, learning and cognition centers around the process of schema formation. Schemas can be defined as mental constructs about the world. Sometimes we use the term concepts. Another way to kind of imagine them are rules for how things are organized. And so we have schemas about a lot of things. We have gender schemas, for example. We have schemas about what men are supposed to look like and how men are supposed to act and the type of attitudes they're supposed to have, in contrast to schemas about women. We have schemas about animals. We classify animals into groups such as dogs versus cats versus wild animals. Schemas are these kind of mental constructs, these mental concepts that we have. And the process by which we form these concepts or schemas are through assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is when you assimilate or add new information to an existing schema, whereas accommodation is when you have to change an existing schema in the face of new information. And the example I'll use is regarding this object. And for example, you may encounter a new food, such as this object here, and you may add it to what you already know and assimilate it into your vegetable or the fruit concept, for example, and say, hey, this must be a fruit. It looks like an orange. Or in this case, it looks like, I don't know, something red, and or an apple, maybe. And so what we would then do is say, oh, it must be a fruit. So we've already assimilated it into our existing fruit concept. However, you take a bite of this object, and you might say, hey, wait, this is not like an orange at all. It's much more like a vegetable. And so therefore, I have to accommodate my schema and put it into this new classification of vegetables. And so what this actually is what's known as a watermelon radish. So it actually is a vegetable. The example given in your textbook goes something like this. We have a child who has exposure to farm animals, in this case, cows. So 2-year-old Gabriella has learned the cow schema from her picture books and through interactions with her parents, maybe her father reading her books and telling her about cows, as well as her mother. Gabriella, this 2-year-old child, for the first time in her life, sees a new animal, in this case a moose. And she says, cow, because it somehow resembles the cows from the pictures that she's seen. And so she automatically assimilates it and adds it to her cow category. But her parents are often there in these cases, and they'll say, oh, that's very adorable, Gabriella. However, that's not a cow, that's a moose. And so now the child has to change her schema and recognize that there's a difference between cow-like animals and moose-like animals. She has to make that subtle discrimination, and so now she has to accommodate and recognize that moose are not like cows. They're in a different category. So this process of assimilating new information into what we already know and accommodating, having to change what we already know in the face of new information, is the process by which Piaget advocates that we develop schemas and how cognition advances. Now, according to Piaget's model, there's 4 basic stages. And being a stage model, it suggests that what happens at one stage kind of follows us into the next. And as you can see from this diagram, there are 4 stages of cognitive development outlined by Piaget. The first one is the so-called sensory motor stage of development. You can see the name here, from 0 to 2. And 2 of the developmental events that are kind of characteristic of this stage, that develop during this stage, are concepts of object permanence and stranger anxiety. The second stage is known as pre-operational, kind of the preschool years of 2 to about 6 or 7. And 2 of the developmental events that kind of characterize this pre-operational child are pretend play and a concept known as egocentrism. The third stage is concrete operations, which is kind of the elementary age cognitive grouping, where children at this stage can think logically about very concrete events and things that they can actually manipulate and touch and have direct experience with. And so concepts such as conservation and simple mathematical transformations are some of the new cognitive abilities you see during this third stage of cognitive development. And then the fourth stage of cognitive development, Piaget called formal operations, and it's pretty much, he said, from 12 and over. And what characterizes formal thinking and distinguishes it from the stages earlier are the development of more mature moral reasoning, hypothetical and abstract logic and reasoning. And so this is the 4 stages, and the progression through each of the stages progresses through differing schema formations, through these interactive processes, assimilating and accommodating. Let's take a look at some of the examples shown here. This first diagram from your textbook shows a pre-operational child. And in this particular case, not pre-operation, I'm sorry, sensory motor. This is a very young child, and this is a demonstration of that concept of object permanence. So in this child recognizes that even though you cover her favorite stuffed animal with a towel or this small blanket, her behavior indicates that she recognizes that even though she can no longer see the object, it still exists. So she then makes the effort to remove the blanket to demonstrate that she actually understood or had this concept that just because she couldn't see it, it's still there. She is demonstrating the ability known as object permanence. If she did not yet have object permanence and you hid her favorite object or this animal, stuffed animal, under a blanket, what she may do is just kind of passively look at there or lose interest, but she won't make any attempt to try to look under the blanket to indicate that she knows that it's still there. This is a concrete operational task known as conservation, and you may be familiar with this little test here. What we have are 2 glasses of equal size and shape, and this young child is shown that they have exactly the same amount of liquid in them. You then take one of these containers and you pour it into a different shaped object, in this case a taller, thinner glass, and then you ask the child to indicate which one she believes may have more than the other, or whether or not she believes they have the same amount of liquid. If you have the ability to conserve, or you have this conservation schema, you would understand that even though the shape of the object is different, the amount of liquid is conserved or remains the same. If this child points to the taller, skinny one, she is showing that she does not yet understand conservation. She's lacking that cognitive ability of conservation. And this is a common mistake. We call it a mistake. Piaget didn't really refer to them as errors or mistakes. He just thought they were different ways of thinking. And he was very interested in the different ways in which the child's mind sees the world and the adult mind, and the progression as cognition advances. This last one demonstrates the pre-operational task of egocentrism. And so egocentrism in the pre-operational child refers to that inability to take the perspective of another or to see the world through the eyes of someone else. And so in this case, the test is you show the child this scenario up here. This is Sally standing next to her red cabinet. This is Anne next to the blue. Sally takes a ball and she puts it in her red cupboard, and then she walks away. Anne then gets up and takes the ball out of the red cupboard and puts it in the blue cupboard. And then the test to the child is, when Sally returns, where will she look for her ball? Now the child who is egocentric is not going to be able to understand that Anne has a different perspective than does Annie. And so the child who is egocentric is more likely to say that Sally will look in the blue cupboard because the child knows that that's where Anne put it, so that's the last place the child saw the ball go, and she or he will assume that Anne or Sally has the same information. Somebody who understands, the perspective taking of another person would say, because Sally lacks the knowledge that Anne moved the ball, when Sally returns, Sally's going to look in her red cupboard. So egocentrism at this young age refers to that inability to kind of see the world through the eyes of somebody else. So this is going to end our lecture on cognitive development, and in our next lecture we will focus more on social emotional development and talk about the theories and the research of Mary Ainsworth and Harry Harlow.